Hello, readers. Welcome to 20 Questions with Your Favorite Author, where we ask authors important questions like, why would you agree to be on this podcast? I'm Kelly Lynn Colby, editorial director at Curse Dragon Ship Publishing. Our guest this week is Jae Mazer, writer of dark horror and mental health expert. After spending the majority of her life battling Sasquatches in the Great White North, she migrated south to Texas to have a go at the armadillo. One day, she decided that she had devoured enough words that she could spin a decent yarn of her own. If she's not your favorite now, she will be after. Excellent. Welcome, Jae. Welcome to our very professional podcast.
Thanks for having me. You get what you get.
That's right. I'll take it every time. So you'd finally read enough words and were ready to create your own. What was the final kick to get you to start writing with focus?
Childbirth.
Childbirth?
Okay, so I'll start at the beginning. This was not my first field.
Wait, your childbirth?
Not my own.
Oh,
okay. Not when I emerged, but when my son emerged. We won't be graphic that much. But I always wrote stories. I actually have a little short story collection I wrote. I think it was late elementary, early junior high, or middle school, whatever you call it here. So I always liked writing little stories. And I read, my mom and dad are both huge readers. Dad always wanted to be a writer. So it was there anyways. But I went into mental health in education, and that's where I worked in Canada. And then we were transferred down here. And I couldn't work. Initially, I was on a visa. And then we got our green cards and I got knocked up. It was immaculate conception. I don't do that kind of naughty business.
Oh, no, never.
No. And that's after I calved my son, I decided that that's a good time to start writing. And there was a series of Kindle shorts or novellas called the Dead Man series. And they had a little contest for Kindle readers to write the next Dead Man series. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, I was breastfeeding at the time. And so I'm sitting there with my Kindle reading that they had this contest. And I'm like, why don't I try? I did not win. But it was fun to write that. I have this really neat story idea in my head that I've had for many years. And so I just sat down and picked at it. Didn't think much of it. Didn't think, I'm going to actually have a physical book in my hand at any point. And then until I did. So I had many rejections.
Part of the game.
And then, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then I had a story published by Cyclet magazine. And one of the people who had sent me a rejection came back and said, we saw your story in Cyclet, and could you please resend that manuscript? And thus Landing in Eden was born. So
nice. Yes. Very cool. You're like breastfeeding. You're like, I have an extra hand. I got to do something.
I mean, I have hands and feet, and there's enough to be done around this joint.
Love it.
So I got to get to work. Yeah.
Well, who were you reading to fuel your imagination?
At the time of writing, or just in general in my whole life? Here's your generic answer. Everybody could be big mads about this. Everybody get ready to flip your tables. Uh-oh. I'm a Stephen King lover. And I loved Stephen King since I was little. And I would say that's a huge inspiration for me. I used to love Dean Koontz. I'm not saying I don't love Dean Koontz anymore. I was an early Koontz reader. And my favorite book of all time was Robert McCammon's Swan Song. Everybody who knows me has heard that at length, and they're vomiting right now, and they're like, stop. But it's true. And it's kind of a rite of passage, because the first horror book I ever read was Watchers by Dean Koontz. And my uncle had passed away. We weren't terribly close. I shouldn't say that. I was very young. And my mom and dad and I were vacationing in Banff in Alberta. And so deep in the mountains in this cabin. And Dad's like, it was his sister's husband. So he's like, I have to go to this funeral. I'm going to leave you guys here for a few days. And I'm like, as a little kid would be. And he's like, well, here's a book. Keep yourself entertained. And it was Dean Koontz, Watchers. And I devoured that sitting in a cabin in the mountains. So you'd have to know the books. There was a lot of impact there. And when he came back, we had like dad-daughter book club and talked all about this book. And he's like, And then he's like, here's Swan Song. And so that was the second horror book I had read, and I could almost recite every word. My sister and I today, and she's like 90 something. She's not, but I call her that. We're in this book club virtually since the pandemic. She's in Canada. We can't get back together. So we have this whole group of people that are in a book club. And on our inaugural meeting last year, they're like, "What's your favorite book?" And Zoe and I were both like, "Swan Song." And she's like, "I did not know that." And she's like, "It's Steven's too, who's my brother." And I'm like, "It's obviously Dad's handed that down to us." So we each have a copy that Dad had got us. So
that's awesome. Well, how long did it take you to write your first book?
That's a really good question. I didn't know there was going to be homework.
Yeah.
Did I get an F?
Yep, there's homework.
I want to say it was a year of picking. That's not including editing.
That's good.
But yeah, a year kind of putting it together. So that book was probably the most outlined, but I'm definitely a pantser for anyone in the writing world. I like to see where my characters take me. I don't firmly outline. I don't world build. I don't do any of that ahead of time. I just see where the story takes me. But that story, I knew it in my head, like right from start to finish. And if you read Eden, you'll know why that's fairly important. That would have to be an outlined kind of story. But it was a year. Time was an issue. Of course, I had a little kid at home. But yeah, a year of picking at it page by page, sentence by sentence. And at the end, the last, we'll say 3-4 chapters flew because I knew, like, you
knew where it was ending.
That climax. I'm like, am I legit here? Am I legit writing the last chapters of a book? And when I was finished, I was like, what is this? What do I do with this? Like, I was baffled by it. And then I discovered all about synopsis C's and all that. I'm like, oh, fuck this noise. What is
It's almost easier just to write another book.
I just want to write a story. I don't want any of this mess.
Ew, the business part. Ew. Ew. Yeah. Yes, ew, the business part. Now, don't you work for a magazine?
Yes, I do.
You are head first into the business part. What can you tell us about the magazine?
I love the magazine. I hate business. So I guess the magazine, that's House of Stitched. The Stitch Smile publication kind of moved. They're still publishing books, but it's very select. So they're very selective about what books they take. And there is more of a focus now on producing this magazine that is for creators. So anybody can read it. It's really interesting to have the insider view, but it's for writers and artists, musicians, podcasters, poets, just the whole gamut. I came in as a columnist and then got promoted, I guess, to acquisitions manager, and the FAFO officer. I apologize for anyone listening to this and who has come in contact with me, but I'm like the bouncer at a bar and I am the security guard for any unfortunate behavior, any super aggressive queries, anything that is problematic. I'm like, I'll get a coffee. I'll take care of this. Right. So I still do.
And by the way, she's downplaying herself because she takes care of it with grace. Thank you very much.
I do. I am professional.
Yeah.
I've
always been impressed. I
will get shorter and more firm the more you go on. We've had a few incidents of that. And I'll just become more clear. I become less gentle and more, you don't need to submit to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on now.
Yes, that's it. Have it as die mad. So I still do write a column or an article for each, and it's nonfiction. It's typically on some aspect of mental health in the horror or dark industry. It's not, House of Stitched is not all horror. They do dark fantasy as well, and any kind of dark thriller, suspense, horror. And then I do a weekly blog for the House of Stitch blog. I do the shocking, I know, but I do the Beast of the Week. So the folklore creature horror posts.
So surprised. I'm so surprised.
Weird, right? When they came up with the blog, I'm like, I'm just going to say that I'll be doing the creature horror.
That's right. And where can people find House of Stitched?
Housefstitched.com. They have the website. Stitch Smile Publications has links. Anywhere you find them, you'll find them together. Facebook, they have really cool Stitch Saturday writing prompts. The magazine itself, you can find anywhere. So you will find it at Barnes & Noble. Amazon's a really good place to get it. We used to use Blurb. We're finding Amazon just has a quicker turnaround time for people that want the physical copy in their hands. And the Kindle or e-copy is absolutely gorgeous. So, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So excited for this venture.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned your clinical psychology background. Like, how much of that education do you use when creating your characters?
All of it. All of it. And I keep it light. I try, like, I mean, it's obviously there. And if you know me and you read these books, you're like, oh, okay, that's pretty smooth. But I try with, especially with my Ramnon books, which is a series of creature horror, each book is a different creature and each book is a different social conundrum or mental illness or something along those lines. So I have a book with the Slua, which is the wild hunt. It's the soul stealers, and assisted suicide. So I raveled those two together. And then the next book was the Wendigo and domestic abuse. And then I had banshees and substance abuse and poverty. And the latest one is illness and parenting. And I'm not going to say what the creature is because that book has yet to be released. So I don't want to,
ruin that for the early readers. That's right.
Well, the Wendigo and the banshees and stuff, those are pretty in your face right up front, but this creature is a little more obscure. I picked creatures from different cultures around the world. So this one was a little more, I read it in a short story and I'm like, what is this creature? So I did some research for a month and I'm like, oh yeah. Oh yes.
That's awesome. Yeah, I actually asked you, I have a question about that, because you use a lot of creatures in your work. Do you have a favorite?
A favorite creature? Ooh, all of them. I think right now pop culture is quite obsessed with the Wendigo. I do like the Wendigo. That originates from the area which I originate from, in the Rocky Mountains. I'm on the Canada side, but that was a fairly big legend up there. So the Wendigo has a fascinating history with the indigenous culture up there and how it's got really socio-political affiliations when the Hudson Bay Company moved in. And winters were long and hard and there was forced migration. And I mean, yes, this stuff happened in Canada too. You know, there were instances of cannibalism and it's not as, like, that sounds awful, and it was awful, but it was out of necessity. It's not, people were not murdering each other. But the indigenous populations and their forced migrations, this was known to happen. It wasn't widespread, but it did happen. And the legend of the Wendigo, of course, got tied in there as a man or human who was greedy. It was a cautionary tale, of course. But if you consumed human flesh, you would be cursed to become the Wendigo. And traditionally, the Wendigo does not have the horns. There's no horns. It's just like an elongated, starving-looking man, ghoul-like creature that can never be satisfied. Like they can never consume enough. We had a real-life notorious killer. I keep wanting to call him a serial killer, but he doesn't fit that criteria. Swift Runner, and I mention him in the Consumed in the Wendigo book. Swift Runner was a member of the Northwest Mounted Police, which is now the RCMP, or the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And he went north with his family. He was Algonquin, I believe. And then he came back to the Northwest Mounted Police shop in central Alberta, and he's like, oh, sucks, my family froze to death. And they're like, cool. So he had a wife and 5 children. And they're like, cool. So they
just believed him and moved on?
They did not. They went out and they found the family. And I don't know what we're rated here. I'm not going to tell you how they found the family. But in the end, Swift Runner said, you know what, I'm Wendigo. I became a Wendigo, and this is what the spirit of the Wendigo possessed me, and I had to eat my family. So sorry about that. And they're like, no. So he was the first person to be legally hanged in the province of Alberta. They're like, we don't eat our families. That's
No.
that's not correct behavior. That was not a correct choice. Like we don't.
It's not okay.
It's not
Yeah,
okay.
it's not okay.
You weren't actually starving. Like you're a professional movie inside. Don't eat your family.
You
Although
know.
I did threaten to eat my son this morning. I said, if you don't smarten up, I'm going to cook you in the smoker and eat you tonight. He's like, you won't. I won't fit. I'm like, I can cut you up. It's fine. Child services is, that's fine.
But I'm sure he's writing a story about it right now, and you're the one who gets cut up. It's fine. He is your son.
Yeah, he does like to write him a good horror story. So,
and there'll be some farts involved, I'm sure.
So many farts. Like, it's unbelievable how they work their way in there, but I like that one his dad. It's fine.
We get it for both sides, man. We got to have both parents in there somewhere.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, Florida Kevin says only eat other people's families. Right.
That's right. Trick. Like, I feel like it wouldn't be as tasty if you're eating your own. Like, there's something there chemically, right? I don't know.
Maybe not as satisfying.
Maybe something. But yeah, so the Wendigo is a fascination. Is it my favorite creature? I don't know. There's tons. My mom is Danish. My next Ramnon book was going to be about mermaids, but horror, because of course the Little Mermaid in Denmark. And Mom's like, do not touch our cultural icon. I'm like, oh, I'm not going to cross Jae Mazer. So I'm like, no, I'm not going to touch the mermaid. So I'm looking at Trolls, because that's
actually a horrible story. I think it totally works as horror. Yeah.
Story. But she's like, don't touch that. Trolls are also really big through Scandinavia. So she's like, go ahead and take the Trolls. You're not taking the mermaids, but you can take the Trolls. So that's what I'm going to go for.
Well, what if the Trolls kidnap the mermaids? I mean,
I had so many ideas. I actually had a reverse Little Mermaid idea. I did write a story about a creature that doesn't exist in folklore called the Vontex, which is a Danish translation, sea witch.
Okay.
And it was a woman fish thing, but she had tentacles in place of arms and legs. So she had 4 tentacle arms and 4 tentacle legs. So, or this whole mythology around the Vontex. So that may come up in Ramnon. I'm not sure. I'm trying to stick to more research-based, like they're fictional stories, but I'm trying to use a lot of actual.
But you want to use the real fictional story.
Yes, I don't want to create a cultural myth that isn't there, right? So that's not what people are expecting with that. But I do. The Sisters 3 does feature the Vontex as one of the creatures. So
interesting. Yeah. Well, we've talked a lot about the different stuff you have. Friday Blue wanted to know, like, if they wanted to start with your horror, where do you recommend?
Oh goodness. Well, it depends on if you like creature horror, it's Ramnon for sure. I do have Crone, but that's a witch story. So it's like kind of a forest hag. Like, I'm not talking, there's no wiggling noses and really cute. Like, you're not going to get Elizabeth Olsen. Like, there's none of that big, beautiful.
Bette Midler? Come on. I mean, I'll compromise Bette Midler.
No, it's not even that. It's like she's a naked forest hag that eats raw wolf. So she's harsh. That's Crone. Ramnon are not in order. They're standalone stories. There are character crossovers. Does it matter which order you go in? Not terribly. The first one I wrote was The Feathered, and that is a novella. It's short. It's shorter. It's about 20,000 words, and that's your first initiation into Ramnon. And that features the Slua, which is a creature of the wild hunt. It's a bird-like. They're usually in a group, they're usually in a flock, and it came around the time of when Catholicism shouldered out paganism, and when the last rites thing started, that the Slua was unbaptized souls, dead souls and they would fly in and grab the soul of a person before they could be read their last rites. So I thought, what if these are individuals? Like, what if they end up, they got to go home at the end of the day. Like, these things got to clock out. Like, it's not all business. Like, there's got to be some sort of margarita. Like, they're going
there has to be. Otherwise, what's the point, right? Yeah.
So they go to Ramnon at the end of the day. And so I have the Slua as these very large, all-female race of bird-like demon women. And we get to know one in particular. And it isn't pleasant. It's really, Ramnon's really ugly horror. I don't do torture porn. I don't do rape. I don't do gratuitous rape. There's none of that. I mean, other than insinuation, off screen, off page kind of thing. But it's ugly. It deals with death and a lot of real life issues in the form of the impossible. So these creatures in a place that couldn't possibly be, in a situation that couldn't possibly exist, we deal with a really hard, heartbreaking set of issues. So it isn't, I mean, it isn't The Life of Pi or something cheery. It isn't like The Secret of Nim. Be warned.
I don't know. Secret Name was pretty horrific.
It is. I was going to say Watership Down, but that trauma.
That one's horrific too. That one scarred me for life.
So upsetting.
Horrible.
Gosh.
The things we read when we were little.
Right? Oh.
That's right. We learned. But I like that. I like that you take these, monsters, these not real things, but then present things humans actually do deal with.
Yes.
So it's almost, I kind of like it because it's, by having it a monster, it feels more conquerable then.
Well, and it's not so it's still pretty intimate, but it's not so intimate as to be unpleasant. I mean, it is pretty unpleasant still, but you may have heard this story. Everybody who knows me is like, oh my God, now it's time to go refill my drink. But how this came about was my dad got cancer. And he was quite ill, and I flew back to camp. My sister phoned me, and she's like, it's time to come home. It's time, like, that's great. So I went and spent, I think it was 3 weeks there, and we had lots of chats. I took Dad on the last drive where he could drive his car and stuff, and we were sitting there the one day, and he said, he was a huge fantasy, horror, science fiction fan. He's like, so what do you suppose is waiting for me? And so we had this huge 3-hour discussion of really cool, like, what about this, and what about Asimov's Foundation, and what if, like, it was this really cool thing. And he said, what I hope is waiting for me is, he used to work in a place called Fort Norman. He was a teacher and went principal administrator, boom, 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 back in the day when you didn't need 78 degrees and 20 years of school. So he went up to the Northwest Territories where nobody wanted to be because it's cold and there's not anything there. And they had to get all their supplies by bush plane if it could land. And they drank, like, he drank cans of carnation milk. Like I said, I make it sound really terrible. He loved it. He loved it. And started his career kind of in with the indigenous population. Great. So he has some fond memories of Ramnot. Sorry. Fort Norman. Anagram. And so he said, I hope that I get to go back. He said, I hope that I pass through and I go to Fort Norman. And he loves Western. So he's like, I hope I walk into the bar there, but it isn't going to be a bar. It's going to be an old fashioned saloon, and time is going to go backwards with me. And I'm going to walk in there, and it's going to be as familiar as Cheers. Everybody's going to know me. I'm going to have a drink, and I'm going to walk out back to some magical beyond that you don't get to know about until you come to. And I was like, that sounds beautiful. And he's like, AJ, because Amanda J, my name. He's like, can you write that? I'm like, no, like, fuck off. You're dying right now. Why are you dying?
Don't give me an assignment. Yeah.
And then, when I got home and all of that had kind of settled, I was like, Fort Norman, I bet I could write Fort Ramnon, precisely to Dad's. I mean, he didn't outline what it would look like. He didn't talk about the creatures. He talked about the saloon. And he mentioned specifically, he's like, we don't know where all these things go. Maybe all the vampires needed it. That's where they go. And the werewolves and the fairies so I'm like, well, and so all of that is explained. Like, the base of Ramnon is set in the Feathered. You could start at any book and you will visit Ramnon. It's not, they're all not set in Ramnon. They all sure end in Ramnon. So you get a good picture of it in the first one. And it's a short intro. It's the least brutal of the Ramnons. There's trigger warnings to the other three. This one's assisted suicide, which was also a discussion that Dad was quite frank about in his last few weeks about, I'm just waiting. And it was hard. It was difficult. So, yeah.
So much. But
so
but by doing that, you can help other people heal. So it's beautiful. What that is beautiful.
Yeah, it was a pretty idea. So, yeah.
Yep. Well, I wonder, because speaking of where you're like, you keep saying, look, there's warnings, read this, but make sure I like that in your writing, like, so you do a lot of hand holding when you're talking to readers, but in your writing, you don't. There's no hand holding. There's no coddling. Like, it is in there.
I have done the hand holding before you pick up the book. If you happen across it on Amazon, take a look with your eyeballs at the cover and read the description. If you go in there and leave me a 2-star review that it's too brutal, that's fine. It's actually good PR. There is no mistaking these books for Amish romance. Like visually, and you're gonna get what you're gonna get, and you're gonna get. I've been very explicit with the back cover blurbs, and my present publisher has been very clear about the content with it and with their categories on Amazon about what you're in for. This is, and as a publisher, I mean, you might have run into this too. This is a huge discussion in a lot of the publishing and writing groups on social media, is trigger warnings and trigger warnings in the horror community. My argument for this, and this is going to sound very cold and very offensive, I welcome all your messages on social, is I don't think we need trigger warnings. I think people are responsible in media for being aware of their own triggers and maybe exploring that. I myself have not very many, but I have 1 or 2 little mild triggers, and I will ask around and see if there's something I don't. I do not like hostile and stuff like that. So if I see something, I'll be like, is this torture porn? Because I'm not really into that. But these are more, so The Wailing, which will be coming out in February, deals very graphically with poverty and substance abuse in Cork County, Ireland, where that's a prevalent social issue. And it's there. It isn't pretty, and it's very explicit, and people will have a problem with that. There is an off-page rape scene, which there's no details, but we know that it has happened, and we know that it's happened to an addict, which is, we're getting her after reactions from it. So that's there. Consumption deals with cannibalism, obviously. It deals with a dead baby. A Swift Runner, of course, did also consume his infant, and that's worked into that story. So I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. If you read a book about the Wendigo, someone getting ate, people are getting eaten, and that's to me
what Wendigos are, right?
That's what they do, and it's not the most horrifying part of that story. And people who read it and they're like, we knew we were getting into someone going to get barbecued. But that's not what was unsettling to them. I know that Billy Stewart he beta read all the Ramnons for me, and he's like, all the really gross stuff is there. Like, there's the horror stuff that you would anticipate from Banshees and Wendigo, but that's not what you think about when you lay down at night. It's that, the drugs and the abuse and the suicide and the all that. I'm like, wow, my creatures are very rarely the bad guys.
True. They just who they are.
But
we've had discussions about that, and I actually agree with you. In adult horror, I don't think there should be trigger warnings, but in YA, that's different.
Well, different. And if as a writer, that's a responsibility I have. If I choose to write young adult horror, I need to know what is appropriate for my age group and what, number one, what they want to consume versus what they should be consuming at this time. And I do not agree with censorship. Do not get me started about censoring the books.
But proper label is different than censoring.
Yeah, horror is a very different creature. There's
proper labeling.
Yeah. The winner of, was it Bram Stoker's last year? I think so. The young adult horror book was Clowns in a Cornfield. That is a romping, fun book. It's by Adam Caesar. If he hears this, I apologize. I don't know how you pronounce that. That is a fun book, and that is definitely YA. The characters are all young high school, so it's drinking at a party, and clowns storm the cornfield with chainsaws and buzzsaws and all. It is fun.
I want to read that. That sounds awesome.
It sounds so simple. It isn't simple. It's really fun. It is. There's a number 2 coming out this year. But that book was a really good example for me of, if I do want to write this, that's what I need. That was more like along the vein of Freddy Krueger and those kind of books without, gratuitous sex. But it was good. It was good. It was a good representation of what people that age could read and enjoy.
Awesome. Yeah, we talked about like all of your creatures and things that scare us. For trigger warnings for me, I might need something on there about dolls. I have to say, dolls are a bit too real looking. They terrify me. And I know you've started quite a dog collection.
So
With Lazarus and the new Two-Face doll. I don't know her name. What's her name?
Hillary Rose. Okay, so
Uh-huh.
Chris's Creepy Misfits. That's a very long story. I won't. She does amazing work. Anyway, so I ended up with this doll. I'm not even gonna go into how that happened. She is phenomenal. She's huge. She's heavy. Like when I got the box, I'm like, what even is this?
What is in here?
Dion's like, no. I'm like, yes. Yes. And you crank her up in the back and she plays music like a tinny
She
little
does not.
She does. I don't think it'll pick it up. It's quite old. I don't think it'll pick it up, so I'm not going to tip her all up.
No.
But I don't collect them. I have 3 in this room right now that are, one was Mandy Fork. She does conventions around Houston and she made and painted Rosa. I don't know where Rosa is right now. Oh, she's on top of the bookshelf. And she's a little undead doll. And it's just a plastic doll repurposed and her amazing artistry. It's horrifying. And you squeeze her belly and she has this little kind of laugh, this really weird, and people love her at conventions. Everyone's like, I want to buy that. I'm like, no.
You're like, you can't, she's mine.
She's mine. These are all mine. Mine. And Lazzie's not a doll. He's my son.
I'm so sorry.
My Jessica son. Werewolf baby. You know, the werewolf babies we see at the conventions the women carry around. That's what he is. Made by Molly Weeks. If anyone wants a werewolf baby, she will birth it for you.
That's awesome. Oh, I didn't realize it was Molly.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's awesome.
Wait. I actually have Lazzie. He's still in his Halloween costume because I'm a neglectful parent.
I love his Halloween costume.
But so she makes these at all latex and foam.
I mean, putting the wolf in the wolf costume, what more could you want?
Well, that's what.
By the way, anyone not here to see this is missing out. All of you listening to the podcast, we appreciate you, but you should really come see this live. It's more fun.
It's a spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
It's a spectacle up in here. Yes.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. Let's see the dolls. Yeah, we can change the screen now. Zafo actually had pictures he put up and he can change them because really, they really creep me out. They can go now. There's a reason why I don't write horror.
I do feature dolls in several of my books, not as a subject matter, more as a prop. Trying to think where I had the most dolls. I did have I had a ballerina music box in Crone because my mom had one when I was growing up and it terrified me. It was terrible and her leg was busted off. It was fine.
Oh, no.
And I do feature dolls in Chrysalis and Clan, very heavily in Chrysalis and Clan. Like the dolls actually do stuff. So, yeah.
So I haven't read that one yet, so I should just leave that one off my list. That's what I'm hearing.
When I first met Jessica Rainey and a troop of her people, one of her friends, Spence, that was the book that he picked up, and he read the first 2 chapters, and then we were at a brewery, whatever it was, 3 or 4 months later, and he's like, I didn't finish reading. What is this? I'm like, okay, so in my defense, it's not an Amish. Nowhere on there are covered wagons and people kissing in the rain. Like, there's nothing. And he's like, you disemboweled, eviscerated entire family, like children in chapter 2. I'm like, wait. I mean, I did do that.
It happened.
It's a pleasure to meet you. Sorry about that. I'm a delight. I'm a fucking delight, except on the page. Just to let you know.
I've always said it's a good thing Stephen King writes because I can imagine where that mind would have went other ways. So, Jay, I'm so glad you write.
Yes, right?
It is a very healthy way.
It's a healthy outlet. And I mean, I love a good horror. I love slashers. My favorite psychological horror. Weird, I know. So I try and incorporate all that. I do love a good creature horror as well.
Yeah.
So.
It's really fun.
Yeah.
I've never seen anyone do it quite like you. It's pretty cool. So I'm going to say you also happen to be a member of the Horror Writers Association.
Sure.
And what do you think are the benefits of joining professional organizations like these?
Oh, boy. Community. Definitely community. There are lots of resources, which is good, and you get discounts on shit, and that's something too, right? But it is community. And I know that I've read a number of phenomenal horror stories and horror books that I have nominated for Bram Stoker Awards, which only active members can do. So that's, to me, the highest compliment, even though these writers are not going to ever know that I have done this. They might not even, if they don't get onto the ballot, they might not even know that people have done this for them. But that is something I feel that's important in the writing community. A connection. They always talk about news and events. We used to have a Houston area chapter. It's tricky to get everybody together. Thank you, COVID, for that.
Yes.
If everyone who's listening missed that, I just flipped not a single but a double bird at COVID there for that. So yeah, Stoke is really good. They have the Horror University there, mentorship programs, all sorts of stuff. So I'm also a member of HAG, which is the Horror Authors Guild, and they as well, same kind of thing. So they do mentorship programs, but resources too. Or if you have a question, they have Facebook groups that you can ask, hey, like I've run into this, what do you think? Or even if it's just about a story, right? Like if you have two different size wings in a story and your creature's trying to do this, does this seem feasible? So it's a really good way to connect. Same as, like you've said in the past, a master's program it's all about the connections. So that's membership in these groups is all about and it's a goal, right? I mean, you can't just walk in the door and be like, hey, I'm here to fuck shit up. You got to sell a certain amount to get membership in these groups. So that was a goal for me when I started out. I'm like, I'm going to be legit. And I did it. So
that's awesome. Exciting. That's awesome. Yeah. Florida Kevin says, don't make COVID angry.
COVID can eat an entire bag of carrots. I don't know what I'm allowed to say on this. Yeah, no, COVID, I try not to make eye contact with it. I'm like, leave me alone. Go over there. Nobody invited you to the party. I don't have a bouncer, but leave.
I just want to know why you said carrots, and that is not what I saw a bag of in my head.
Well, that's not actually what I was thinking of. My carrots are more pink and fleshy and veiny. So
yeah, that's what I was seeing. So it's very weird.
I don't know who our audience is here. I'm trying to be good.
You never know.
Encouraging good behavior.
By the way, Florida Kevin solved your troll problem because he said he read somewhere that troll was just the word for monsters.
Which is true. There are various species of troll in Scandinavian folklore. So
just make the mermaids monsters.
I mean, I don't know. I'll send Jae Mazer to you. If I write a mermaid story, I'll be like, Kelly and Kevin encouraged my behavior. And don't worry, because she'll know the difference. I mean, she made this. She made me. So she's aware of where this comes from.
Oh, I can take it. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
Let's see. So Kevin wants to know, are your monsters allegorical? I think we kind of talked about that one.
A little bit, yeah. And sometimes, depends on the monster too. Some crone, I don't want to give anything away. Yes, definitely. That's left up to your imagination at the end of what actually went on with these women. And sometimes they're just literal. Like sometimes it's just a werewolf that rips a dick off and chokes a pedophile with it. Sisters 3, shout out. Just anyone want to read that mess? Right. Yeah, so it's most of the time allegorical. Lots of the time it's a combination. Like Ramnon's definitely, you will leave thinking, what is happening here?
What is what here?
What is what here?
No, I've said Crone has one of my favorite lines. Like I looked it up because it's right at the beginning, so I could write it down to make sure I got it right. Where it's, Abby knew there was no witch under the stairs. She forced herself to know, but she didn't quite believe.
Yeah.
And I love that because that's me. Like I always remember there was a church we always had Girl Scout meetings in.
Yeah.
And I knew that church. It's a Presbyterian church. It's not even like tall Gothic, right? You know, it's fine. There's stained glass. I knew that church. I knew where every bench was. I could walk around it with my eyes closed. But when the lights were out, it terrified me.
Yes.
Terrified me. I had to walk through the aisle between the pews to where the lights were, because the door you came in, the light switch, of course, was on the other side of the room.
Yeah.
And I was like, I know there's nothing here. And I would just say it over and over in my head. I know there's nothing here. It's a church. I know where everything is. Everything's fine. Everything's good until I turn on that light. And then finally, that's when I felt good.
You can actually see it because our eyes often tell a very different story than our brain, right? So trying to put that together. So Crone, I don't know if you've heard this story. Again, anyone who knows me, my apologies, 700th time. Crone was actually based on childhood trauma that my sister inflicted upon my brother. And whilst growing up, they are the same age, my brother and sister. And she's a little bit older. She convinced Stephen that there was a witch living under the stairs in our basement in northern Canada. And Stephen was like, you would not go downstairs. And there was a specific story that I was very little, and I remember this, that Dad's like, you go grab some rolls from the cold storage room. Do you know what a cold storage room is?
Well, it's a basement here, right?
No, so it's a basement room without insulation. So you go down, you have your basement's carpeted, it's insulated, like you can live there and have whatever. But then there's a room along the outside edges that there isn't insulated, that there's just the dirt around. So it's going to be cold, not refrigerator cold, but it's going to be cold.
Gotcha.
And he would not go down. So she convinced him this for years, and she would hide under the basement stairs and knock on them and all that. So like, she was a shit. And Zoe is not on social media, so it's good luck defending yourself.
She knows what karma is. She's like, I'm staying away.
Yeah. And the three of us, Stephen and I, did not share a room, but I had his room after he did. Like, we were kind of in the same room. And we both had instances of knocking and stuff like that, which is easily explained away. But when you're a child, you have these experiences. So I don't know how it popped in my head about Phaleth and the Crone story, but I'm like, what if Zoe had created a legend here? So what if there was something under those stairs? And so I started Crone. I started that book with Abby, the main character, going down those stairs and saying that there's nobody there, there's nobody there, there's nobody there. But then seeing the eyes and hearing the breath. And we, of course, follow Abby into adulthood, where, you know what? There's something. We don't know what it is, but there was nothing under those stairs. So
gotta read it. No, I love that line. That one's, I need to like put that up somewhere. It's funny where you find truth sometimes. And that was truth. That was truth right there.
Yeah.
I liked it. I liked it a lot. So now we've talked about tons of books and creatures and all kinds of things and stuff inspired by real life. Which of your books challenged you the most?
Challenged me the most? That's a really good question. I had a little bit of difficulty with Ripples of Silence, which is the book that I wrote with my dad. So he had the idea for a character, and he said, I have this idea for a character. It could be a series. This is well before he was sick, before he was diagnosed. And he's like, I want you to write this. I'm like, oh, okay. So I thought about it, and then I got back to him, and Dad had published several articles in magazines, like nonfiction, about living in the North, and living in kind of the northern communities and doing all that. He had published a few short stories. So I got back to him and I said, hey, why don't you and I write it together? Like, this is your character and your idea, and this is not my forte. This is true crime. Like, there's no creatures in that story. So, I mean, I'm not going to lie. Like, a wing or a tentacle is going to pop out if you leave this to me. So
I can't help myself.
We talked about it and we plotted, which I don't usually do. And we planned to write this book. And I said, how we'll do this, because we both love crime shows. We both also love the X-Files, all that kind of stuff. Said, I'll write a chapter from the perspective of this character. And then I'm going to email it to you. You have to write the next chapter and email it back to me. And so we went back and forth and did that. And we were probably 3/4 of the way through when Dad got sick. And I was like, oh, so that got put on hold. And then during that last visit, like, we were so close to the end, and I realized how important that was to him, because Dad had never published a book. So we sat down and we finished that book. And so that was a challenge, because it's more of a murder mystery. It's definitely a serial killer / murder mystery. But we got it finished. And with the help of Netherworld Books and the help of Lisa Vasquez, we were able to put everything together with the cover in time for Dad to actually have it in his hands. So that was very important. That was a tricky thing for me, because it was his story. It was his character and his idea. So it was like, but we had a lot of fun with it. We had a lot. Like he'd be in true Mazer fashion. He'd be like, he'd send me a chapter and he'd have this evil laugh. And I'd look, I'm like, what the fuck am I supposed to do with this? He's like, I don't know, but it's your turn. So I'm like, all right, here we go. So it's kind of like,
welcome to my life, the editor side.
right? Like, God, Dad, seriously. And he'd just do stuff to throw me sometimes. I'm like, okay, all right, bitch. We're going to get it back. It's fine.
I gotcha.
I got this. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, as Zafo says, personally, real life is scary enough for him, so he reads to escape, not to soil his pants. Yes, I understand that too.
Well, and that's kind of, for me, this is often a question in discussion groups and in academic papers and stuff, is why are people drawn to horror, especially in today's, why are so many people reading The Handmaid's Tale right now? Like, do we not? And that's exactly it. It's escapism in a safe forum, right? Like, we are not in the pages of that book. So we can relate, which is healthy, because we can experience those emotions through another person's brain and eyes and ears and the tactile experience of it all without being that person.
Which can teach you empathy too.
Exactly.
So some more of that.
Books are super safe. That being said, and this does not impact me, I do come from a place of privilege. I will preface by saying that. But I am reading Mexican Dirt right now because that's the next book up for our book club, my sister and I. And they picked this gaggle of Canadians. And I'm reading this and I'm like, I'm really curious how this book club is going to receive this as opposed to I receive this. This book is heartbreaking to me and I'm upset with my sister that we are reading this at Christmas time. It is an excellent book. I don't know. And yes, everybody come at me in my DMs. It is an excellent book. I understand maybe she wasn't the person to write it. I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm going to finish the book first. I have a little bit to go. But it is a story that needed told, and I think it is told well. I'm saying that as a white woman coming from a place of privilege for those who have read American Dirt. So take my opinion for what it's worth. But it is horror that is so real. It's kind of like, ooh, but I can sit back in my comfy chair with my cab salve and experience that, to kind of have some empathy for that situation. Without having to lose limbs and whatnot.
Actually have to live through that.
Yes. Bye.
Yeah. Well, the audience is with you. We have both Spikette, Icy Hot, and Friday Blue. All of them listen or read Stephen King like right before bed. Like they're right up your alley. They understand.
So Stephen King he writes some horror. I would say that his books as of late are not horror. That's not a criticism at all. He just tells a good story. I mean, I think it's important to classify him as horror because some of the stuff he does write is quite horrific and you don't want people surprised by it. But his are genreless to me. They're good stories. You have Misery, which is horrifying, but it is an excellent commentary on mental illness and obsession. You have his latest, Billy Summers, which came second in the Good Year's Book of the Year or Horror Book of the Year, which I was like, it's true crime. But that is an excellent book, and line for line, really good on the human condition, aside from the really cool kind of noir crime story he had going on there. So it's just a story. Writers just tell a story, and I don't think we need to think too hard about the why of it.
I can agree with you.
Yeah.
Oh, I lied. Sorry. Zafo and McFly are out. They're like, nope, no horror for me. Thank you.
No. Well, I've only written one non-horror. That is not true. I've only published one non-horror short story. I've written romance. I'm not shitting you. But I've only published one non-horror, and it was for Eclectically Heroic through Inklings. It was The Flight of the Crow, which you edited, Kelly. So that was not horror. It wasn't fun. It wasn't funny. But it was just kind of a drama commentary on abuse and escape. So I guess in poverty and mental illness as well, in a really roundabout kind of way. But I also have written in writing contests where they draw your genre for you, New York City Minute. I have consistently drawn comedy, romantic comedy, and romance, and have consistently placed in third, second, and first place. So, Harlequin,
do it.
Here I come.
Might actually make money this way. I don't know.
I mean, really, seriously.
That's right. Why am I writing things I love? I should just make money.
I
Oh,
mean,
wait, I know. It's because I can't write anything I
I
don't love.
can't write any. I couldn't write a long romance to save my life. I had a writer
I lose
friend
interest.
from the guild, like how long ago was that now? 5 years ago, that challenged me for a NaNoWriMo. She was like, "Hey, I challenge you to write a romance this Nano," and I'm like, "Bitch, don't challenge me to do anything because I'll do it and I'll do it hard." And so I started off with this beautiful romance story called Notch. And 2 weeks in, I'm like, it's so romantic. It just became porn. And so it went from romance to porn to horotica. It also went down the horror path. So in the end, I had this thing, this abomination. Like if you've seen the Kurt Russell movie, the dog with all the everything, that's what ended up birthing out of me. And I sent it off to Netherworld. I'm like,
Here you go.
I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. I'm sorry about that. And a few weeks later, Clara came back and she's like, cool. We do want to publish this because it's going to sell like hotcakes. We're not going to use your name. We're going to give you a pen name for that one. I'm like, okay. So that one is still available as J.M. Adler Notch. It's classy business.
Classy.
Not classy business. It's a ghost story / horotica. Like every page is not for consumption by sensible minds. So.
Well, we started late, so I let us go a little late, but we are in the lightning round now. So lightning round. What is your favorite holiday dish? It's totally the same mood that we read
Blood
earlier.
of my enemies.
Oh, that sounds fair. Hot, warm, congealed.
Warm is better because it's warm, it's less chunky. Throw a little bit of chocolate shavings up in that motherfucker. Delicious.
Make it fancy. I gotcha.
And that's a Christmas dish if you're wondering what holiday. When you're around family.
That's when you have to drink blood.
That. Yeah.
I gotcha. Yeah. And now I'm afraid to ask, but this is our classic question. What is your favorite flavor of ice cream?
Okay. Get ready for this, everyone. Hold on to your butts.
Okay.
I do not like ice cream. If I was forced at knife point to eat ice cream, I would take the blade.
Oh.
I know.
You know that friendship we had going? I don't know.
I know. I mean, I like cookie dough. I guess if you toss that and held the ice cream part.
So just raw cookie dough. No ice cream, just raw cookie dough. Okay.
That's my thing. Cookie
dough ice cream with a spoon on a cone. I mean, that works. That's a compromise. I think that's fair.
The Dairy Queen dish, it's perfectly fine.
Let's see. Besides Celine Dion, who is your favorite band or musician?
Well, I would like to start by saying absolutely not Celine Dion. And if I was Justin Trudeau, I would revoke her citizenship. So let's get that out of the way.
Okay.
My favorite to write to or in general, I can't have a favorite. I can't. There's too many. I've been asked this question before. I write to a lot of classical music, specifically this. You'll laugh at this: the soundtracks to Game of Thrones or Westworld. Ramin Djawadi.
No, actually, that works. That guy's awesome.
Aside from being my number 2 on my Desert Island 5, he is an amazing composer, and that music is phenomenal. When I'm writing the Ramnon series, I also listen to Colter Wall, which will surprise a lot of people. He is, I want to call him folk, but he's not. He's old style country like Johnny Cash, but really deep voice. He's a kid. He's like in his early 20s from Saskatchewan. But he's big, like he tours down here, and he's got that Ramnon Western sound. So I like listening to him a lot. I also listen to Courtney Love, Lizzo. Big fan of I'm a 90s baby, so I'm a fan of Nirvana and Garbage and Whole Bush. Are we talking about music still?
Yeah. Okay. And unless you went off the topic with Bush, I don't know. I mean, we could get back to
Kevin's
that
like, he knows what I'm getting at.
Kevin's like, I'm on board. That's right.
Bush, Moist, and all those bands. So yeah, all of that. Absolutely negative to the Celine Dion. Like, I would rather lose my hearing. Like Mr. Holland's Opus, I would sign up for the real life version if I had to hear Celine Dion anymore.
Well, considering, you've got the whole razor thing going, I think there's more Celine Dion in your future.
Well, I mean, I weaponized her. See.
Oh, I
see. So.
You tried.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the first thing you do when you get up in the morning?
Yell. Everything that crosses my path.
That's the best answer yet. What is your least favorite chore around the house?
Picking up fucking socks.
Yep, it's the men in your house, man. See, you're the only girl. Dog doesn't count.
Like, I will go just like there was a sock on my bass guitar the other day. I'm like, why is it's not even in a room where everybody else is. There's little boy socks and big man socks. I don't say little boy. He's a men's size 11 and a half now.
He's almost taller than I am. Yeah.
Yeah, he's for sure taller than you are now. But there's socks everywhere. Like, I kid you not, I don't think I bought this many socks. Like, they're fornicating at night and reproducing in my couch, in my kitchen, in my music room, they're everywhere. They're everywhere. They're in my car, they're on my lawn.
Maybe the hole in everyone's dryer is just at your house.
There's a vortex. There's a black hole somewhere here, because even today, when I was in my really grumpy mood walking around, my COVID grumps, I'm like, fucking socks everywhere.
Go away, socks.
We're all going barefoot. That's it. I'm burning them all. Screw the bra burning. I'm burning socks.
Problem solved. I mean, we're in Texas. We only need them a few weeks out of the year anyways.
I mean, really. Yeah, true. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So where can fans find you and your work?
I like moldy rocks. So if you find one that's really moldy and gross, maybe with fungus on it, just lift it up. I'll be right under there. I'm old. So Jae Mazer.
Jae Mazer.
Everywhere. I do not tick a talk. I do not know what to tick on a talk or how ticking a talk works. So I am on there. You will not find me on there. I do not dance with my books. I am on Twitter. Ken Forsland has been trying to show me the way and teach me how to Twitter. I have not Twittered well. So you will find me on Instagram and Facebook. I do not accept dick pics. I do not want my writing explained to me. If you have questions, I'd be happy to hear them. If you have comments and criticisms, that's great. I'm not interested in politics. I am Canadian. I do not have an American political affiliation. I'm not interested in yours.
Fair.
I do not want to discuss religion. I do not want to discuss the sexual orientation of goats. I kid you not.
What?
There's just some things I'm not interested in. I mean, I might actually discuss the sexual orientation of goats. And further thought, after I brushed that off, I'm like, wait, that was probably a really interesting conversation. But yeah.
I could totally see us getting into that. I mean,
we could. I mean, it sounds very much like something I would talk about. But yeah, I welcome any kind of chitty-chatty discussion of a respectful nature on social media, whether it pertains to writing or anything else within reason.
Sounds fair. Yeah. Excellent. Well, now that Jae Mazer is your favorite author, please make sure to review her work and review our podcast wherever it is you get your podcasts. And you can also follow us on Twitch or subscribe on YouTube. And next week, we will be back 8 p.m. Central on Tuesday with Dakota Kraut. We'll see you then.